And what's up? Welcome in GC Live. I'm Wes Mitchell. He is Chris Clark. Monday episode of the show. Thank you for being with us, and thank you for bearing with us as well. Some internet issues over here, but now I get to have a plain Chris background and doing the show from elsewhere. So hopefully we are locked in now, and we can talk a little bit of Gamecock sports. But first, I want to tell everybody about my good friend Clint Hammond. Clint is, of course, the main guy over there at the Mortgage Network here in Columbia, South Carolina, right across from Dreer High School. Give Clint a shout, clinthammond.com, 803-771-6933, presenting sponsor here on GC Live. And if you, are in the market for a house right now, I know houses are selling like crazy right now. Interest rates are still low. If you're in the market, give Clint a shout. Or if you just want to save some money on your current home, maybe refinance, maybe figure out, get you a better interest rate, then give Clint a shout for that as well, 803-771-6933. He'll get you hooked up and get you set up. Great weekend, Chris, for South Carolina athletics. So today will be an easy show for us because there is no shortage of things to talk about. You can start with South Carolina baseball, a sweep of Florida over the weekend. They're playing really outstanding right now for the last, I guess you go back ever since the Game 3 win over Vanderbilt, 5 wins in a row. Very, very impressive. Women's basketball with a win Sunday advances to the Elite Eight. They'll face Texas and a familiar coach there in Vic Schaefer on Tuesday night. And, of course, South Carolina's football coaches. We got to hear from the OC and the DC, Marcus Satterfield and Clayton White speaking today. So, Chris, no shortage of things going on, and should have Gamecock fans in a good mood this week, I think. And of course, we believe there is finally a final word on what's going to happen with the South Carolina men's basketball program, which we talked about on Friday. It looked like it was heading that direction.
Yeah, man. I mean, a lot there. There's a lot to digest, and the first thing that came to mind was, this weekend, sort of simultaneously trying to watch Game 3 of the Gamecocks series sweep over Florida, and also watching the women's game at that same time, the Sweet 16 matchup against Georgia Tech. And that was the first thing I thought of. It's pretty evident this is going to be a good weekend for Gamecock sports. I know we did a show a while back where they sort of had a perfect weekend, so to speak. It wasn't perfect, but certainly with the biggest sports that we're playing, sort of in the spotlight with the NCAA tournament going on, and obviously a huge series against top 5 Florida, they were able to pass both those tests. And Wes, starting with, I don't know where you want to start with, but I think baseball is the first one that came to mind for me. It really looked like the Gamecock team that we saw at the beginning of the year when they won 11 straight. Obviously, they scuffled after that against Texas. You run into Vanderbilt, they're playing really well. They're really, really talented. They're probably even better than people thought, and people thought that they were really good. But you play a Florida team that's super talented, that was really highly regarded coming into this season, and had huge expectations. And not only do you take the series, but you go out and you're able to sweep them. And so an almost historical sweep, really. First time since, 2011 that you've taken a series from Florida in baseball, so that was significant. Florida has only been swept under Kevin O'Sullivan in SEC series. I can't remember the exact stat. Gamecock Russ, our guy, probably has it, or Wes, I don't know if you know it.
I got it for you.
What is that one? It was incredible.
Six times in the last decade. They have had 91 SEC series.
Yep.
Which before this week. So which adds up because the 9 years basically, and that would be 90 series, and then one SEC series already this year. So you're working on the 10th year of this stretch, and at the end of the year they will have had 100 SEC series in a decade. Well, they had been swept 6 times during that span. So now 7, obviously, with South Carolina. And yeah, dude, like you said, so impressive. And not that we should get greedy But my one sort of that would have been cool thing for this weekend was the possibility of there being a full house, in at Founders Park, because that thing got chippy,
Yeah.
and the two teams don't really seem to like each other. At some point, this thing turned pretty chippy. I guess when you're on the field with a team for 14 innings of a close ball game, then that can then sort of happen. I think the game Friday may have lasted longer than the other two games combined as far as the number of minutes that it lasted. But I thought even for a smaller crowd, a forced smaller crowd, I thought the fans were in it. I think there was a little bit more. There was like an actual. I don't know if they were actual students, to be honest with you, but maybe they were, maybe they weren't. But there was an actual section of people who were sort of, giving Florida some grief, and Florida did not respond based on some stuff I saw on social media. Came across kind of soft, man. Like they did not respond the way you should if you're a top 5 program, a top 5 team, and stuff like that. So, I think there was a Florida guy, according to social media, who apparently was inviting people to fight him in the parking lot. Which the best response to that was the person that tweeted, with what I saw this week, they would swing and miss anyway, so you're not in any danger at all. So yeah, I mean the crowd, despite being a small crowd, was into this. So I think the only sort of negative was that you couldn't have a full house and go, sort of really have that home field advantage. But Chris, dude, to come out, I mean, they're 4-2 after facing Vandy, obviously on the road, and Florida at home. If you just sort of group those two series together, most people would have been very happy with 3-3. To come out of it 4-2, going to now you can't let up, obviously, even though the schedule gets quote easier, but that doesn't really mean anything. You got to go on the road again and face Georgia. But I think, man, we're seeing that some of the sort of antics from the team, the stuff they do to keep themselves loose, and the props they have. That's not just talk. It's not just funny. Like they seem to play that way too. They're a loose team, and they're talented, man. I think we continue to see this South Carolina pitching staff be very, very impressive. They continue to build depth. Brett Carey, when they can use him in multiple games, and now I don't know, man. I think they found something with Will Sanders on Sunday, because I think Bosnick's stuff plays up as a guy. If you can tell him, hey, go pitch 2 innings. Dude, he was throwing, I know he gave up the home run on Friday, but he was throwing gas from the left side. Sanders takes over Sunday potentially. And, then you can use Brett Carey for multiple stints throughout the weekend. I think you're starting to see this team sort of take shape.
Yeah, and the thing that stood out to me was I think a lot of the things that we saw as sort of hallmarks of this team at the beginning of the year when they went on that streak. Now, granted, they weren't playing Florida and Vandy, but they did play Clemson. They played some teams that could potentially give you some trouble, and didn't lose a game in 11 games. And so the difference between that and sort of the losing streak, and I take out Vandy because they're going to, that was a close series at the end of the day. Even though South Carolina got no hit, really the swing game there was the Friday game. You face Kumar Rocker, you lose by a run, so it's not like Vandy that weekend was just heads and shoulders better. I think the Texas series is probably the most disappointing one. But was that more of an aberration? And we don't know yet, but maybe so. And I think what we saw against Florida, against a really good team for South Carolina, was some of the hallmarks that we saw early in the year with this team. And it was the ability to hit for power, timely hits, right? No better example of that than Andrew Eister's home run with 2 strikes and 2 outs, in the 14th inning to go up. We saw some clutch defensive plays. Brady Allen had more than one. And then we saw some really, really good pitching. And so we knew that this team had the capability to do those things. It was just about putting them together and doing them consistently. And so they got back to that. And so as Colin Taylor, our great beat writer at Gamecock Central, has sort of pegged the Kingston ejection in the Vandy game as was that sort of a turning point, in that for the season even, and maybe, there's a little bit of humor to that, but all I know is since then they've gone 4-0 with 4 straight top 5 wins, in those SEC games, and they've played really well. So certainly they're back to those winning ways, man. And what we saw from this team early in the year during that streak is what they showed against Florida. So it's definitely a huge series.
Yeah, and I'm not buying the ejection as being the catalyst for all this. I think the catalyst is that these guys just kept pushing, and there will be a dip in this season. There will be another, baseball is a roller coaster. Like it is a very long roller coaster, and you're going to have your times where things are going really well. You're going to have times where they're just not. So there'll be another dip at some point, but I think we also have to, when we sort of start to look at what's happened so far, a lot of times we forget, hey, what the team is now may not be what the team was. It's a different team that went to Texas than the one that played against Florida this weekend. And there'll be a different team, even though it's the same guys, a different team will face, whoever they face in 4 weeks. And so I think we have to remember, you're either getting worse or you're getting better. And the thing for South Carolina right now is they're sort of, you always know going in where you think your pieces are going to fall as far as how your team will be structured. But the best teams will continue to tweak and tinker and change and move guys around and look for the best fit, whether that's, positionally, your lineup, or, who's in the lineup, or how you structure, your pitching. So I think we're seeing that. It's for the most part the same, but you're seeing, the change on Sunday, the change in maybe how you use some guys, who's up first, who's up last, as far as your pitchers go. So, yeah, I think there's a lot to like about this team, as we know, but we're also seeing them get better as the season progresses so far. And as Steven points out, don't forget Khalil's big hit. He was due, but I saw some people asking why was Mark Kingston so adamant after Saturday's game that Khalil is his guy, and why not give somebody else a chance? Well, I think one, maybe he doesn't get that hit without Kingston sort of giving him that, basically co-signing for him, saying, hey, this is our guy. He doesn't have to worry about not being our guy. And different kids respond different ways. So you may be looking at it as a fan and saying, well, competition should be open at every spot. Well, as a coach, Kingston's saying, my guy needs for me to have his back. And maybe he feels the confidence isn't there, or there's something missing as far mentally. He's trying to push the positive buttons as opposed to push the sort of pressure buttons. If you don't perform, you're out of here type thing. So that's, I think, comes from knowing your personnel, knowing your players as people, as opposed to just seeing them as a jersey, and treating every guy the exact same way. So good for him, man. Hopefully for his sake, that gets him going, because he was, really scuffling there for a stretch. The defense is still good, but certainly the more you can sort of be able to put pressure on teams throughout your entire lineup, the better off you're going to be, obviously. But great weekend again. A ton to like about, obviously the outcome, but the way it happened, and the way South Carolina played and competed against obviously a really talented Florida team. We'll find out, are they top 5 worthy? I don't know. My only complaint with the crowd, though, somebody was trying to get the overrated chant going, which is probably my top 3 least favorite chants in sports. Don't call them overrated. Just be glad you beat, a top 5 team. But anyway, if that's your only complaint, then probably a pretty good weekend. Chris, South Carolina women's basketball, they get a big dub, and these things were going on at the almost the exact same time, as far as the two games were ending around the same time, like the closing minutes of the women's basketball game and the closing inning or two of the baseball game were going on at the exact same time. South Carolina took care of business. They had a pretty big lead in the second half. Georgia Tech, it felt like they were chipping away, like they never completely went away. They played hard, I thought, and were up to the task of staying in the game. Didn't seem to get completely intimidated by South Carolina, but South Carolina hung in there, was never really like seriously in doubt, towards the end, even as Georgia Tech chipped away. But great game, obviously, with South Carolina. They're starting to figure out some things, even though they're not entirely healthy. They're missing one of their key parts, but that the bench has actually stepped up in the absence, of one of their key players. So I'll be very intrigued by this matchup tomorrow, because I think you're, in a lot of ways, Chris, you're seeing this basketball team starting to play maybe their best ball down the stretch.
Yeah, and the beginning of the Georgia Tech game, it reminded me of the other two against Oregon State and Mercer, in that, South Carolina scuffled a little bit, got off to a little bit of a sluggish start. The other team hit some shots, made some plays, but South Carolina was able to eventually overpower. And really, they did it on the strength of their post play. And in this particular game, hit some three-pointers, which some of our loyal listeners and watchers are pointing out here. Zia Cook got the three ball going. Destiny Littleton hit the three. As you said, Wes, LA continues to be big for this team off the bench. She really has looked more and more explosive as things go on. Aaliyah Boston, obviously a slow start in the first half, but it stood out. First offensive possession of the second half, Dawn Staley makes a concerted effort where you're getting the ball to Aaliyah Boston in the post. She scores on her first touch. So that was obviously a priority for this team, and they're able to get things going. And Georgia Tech, has played well, obviously earned the ability to be in there, and so they're a good team as well. One of their players, really looked like Manu Ginobili in the first half. It was unreal. It got on a sort of a hot streak. South Carolina didn't have any answers for a while, but they turned things up, defensively in the second half. And really it was their post play, I think, and hitting some threes in this particular game that rode them. But this, Wes, opens up a very intriguing matchup, not just because of the opponent with Texas, but the return of Dawn Staley versus Vic Schaefer, who, of course, was at Mississippi State for several years and did a great job there. And always between those two squads, when they met, Mississippi State and South Carolina, when Schaefer was there, always seemed to have some special importance attached to that game, right? Whether it was, SEC championship determining game, or obviously a national title game. So this one, I think, will be very interesting, because Schaefer's team in Texas last night, I don't know if you watched that, Wes, watched a lot of that game against Maryland last night. And Maryland came in super talented, averaging 90 points a game, I think. Texas just mucked it up, and they scored 59, and Texas was able to escape with a win. So Texas can cause you a lot of problems. So South Carolina definitely have their work cut out for them there.
Yeah, and I actually didn't watch most of that game, but I caught a lot of the Alabama UCLA men's game, which was fantastic. Alabama kid hit a three at the buzzer to send it to OT, but Alabama just, I don't know, they looked maybe emotionally spent or something at that point, which I thought it would have been the reverse. Anyway, so I watched most of that game. It ended, and then I was actually looking on my phone at the app, and for a while it looked like, just again, I wasn't watching the game yet, it seemed like Maryland was in control, had like a 10, 11-point lead or something when I looked at it. And then I looked at it again, and I was like, whoa, it's tightened up. So I did watch the end of that game. Texas made the plays late, did what they needed to do to win. I thought that at the time that was an odd move that Schaefer would leave Mississippi State, just on the surface, being someone not plugged in. I thought that was an odd move to leave there and go to Texas, but big win for them. Maryland came in, super hot team. They were playing very well, as you said, scoring 90-plus points a game. That was their season low. which they picked a heck of a time for that. But obviously, you got to give a lot of credit to Texas. So this, Chris, to me, you go into this game on the surface, you might be like, well, a 1 seed against a 6 seed sets up pretty well for South Carolina. It does, but I expect an absolute battle just based on the few minutes, just watching Texas, the few minutes I did. They seem to have some very athletic girls, and I think it'd be a fun matchup for South Carolina fans, and in a quick turnaround. I mean, you don't get long to think about making the Elite Eight. You turn right back around and have a big battle for them tomorrow evening, 7:00 ESPN.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, and that's the thing, man. I mean, we all know in the tournament you can't just look at seeding. You don't look at record. What a team did in February, January, it doesn't matter. You're in the tournament. Crazy things can happen, as they can in the regular season, but it always seems to be heightened, during the tournament. And I mean, look, this is a team that in Maryland had come into the tournament hot, like playing some of their best basketball. They beat Alabama 100-64. They beat Mount St. Mary's in the first round 98-45. Putting up huge, just silly numbers, and had not lost since January 25th at Ohio State. Had only lost 2 games in total. And one of those games was early in the year to Missouri State, who was actually, I believe, was a Sweet 16 team as well for women's college basketball. So really good squad for Maryland. And so, look, did Maryland have their worst day? I mean, statistically they did. But did they just not play very well? And combine that with, did Texas put forth a Herculean effort, a great effort? I mean, maybe so. But the point is, you never know what's going to happen. Obviously, Vic Schaefer's a really, really quality coach, and they do have some talented players. They have some players that can hit from outside. They play good defense. They hustle. They have some presence inside with Collier. She had, I thought, a really good game last night. So it's definitely, I think that's a great way to describe it, is that I think you can expect a battle between these teams along the lines of what we've seen in the past between Mississippi State and South Carolina when Schaefer was there.
Yeah, so it should be fun. Hey, if you're a fan, enjoy it. The kids play all year round to get to this point. But as a fan base, I think it's important not to take it for granted that South Carolina is on this run that they are as a women's basketball program, because it is easy to sort of get complacent that, another big run here, but an opportunity anytime you're going to the Final Four. Obviously, if South Carolina wins, they'll go to the Final Four. If you are one of the 4 best at anything you do in the country, that is amazing and should be applauded. So another real opportunity for South Carolina to do that. Will be fun to watch. And, of course, we'll have complete coverage, GamecockCentral.com. Chris Wellbaum, who does, as I would say, underrated job covering a sport as anybody. And our women's basketball coverage, other than the game thread, which lives on the Insiders Forum, the stories and the articles and all that stuff, it's free. So if you are a South Carolina women's basketball fan, please go check that out, GamecockCentral.com. Chris with a very nice notebook of information previewing that matchup, and then he normally has 5 things to watch the morning of each game, and I'm sure he'll have that on Tuesday morning. Let's shift gears, Chris. Football. No other players talking today, but actually some interesting insight today. Marcus Satterfield, offensive coordinator, Clayton White, defense coordinator, speaking to the media. Actually pretty in-depth, long press conferences there. And first up was Marcus Satterfield. And I'll tell you, Chris, I was having internet problems. I caught part of Satterfield. I'm going to have to lean on you completely with Clayton White, because I've literally not heard a word of it yet. I'm going to have to go back and watch it or listen to it. I did catch part of Satterfield, and he was very complimentary of the guys he's inherited. I think obviously anytime there's a changeover in coaching staff, there are going to be some holes in your roster. That's pretty obvious. But, I think just listening to him talk about the running backs, which we know, there's a really good chance that group will be really good. Some of the veterans on the offensive line, talking about Nick Muse, And then, talking about Luke Doty, he emphasized that he's a natural passer, and then even went into some depth about what that means. And then even sort of, I would say, pushed back at this notion that, that the receivers are at the very least, a question mark on the team. He said, I've heard all the rumblings about what this group can't do. And I'm excited to see what they can do, or to show, for them to show what they can do. So I sort of left thinking, okay, yeah, there are holes in the roster at certain spots, but Satterfield actually conveyed I think a sense of confidence about his group as a whole.
Yeah, and I think so. Two things on that. I think one is that we know it's sort of along the lines of what you said about Mark Kingston earlier with the baseball team, the positivity, and we know with this football staff that's going to be a huge staple of just what they do internally and externally as far as their messaging. And to be fair, I mean, most coaches, there are some exceptions. You're going to hear football coaches get up sometimes and to send a message or whatever it may be, get up there and say, we're not playing well enough. We're not doing this well enough. We need these guys to step up. But we know, especially at this juncture, Wes, with a team that has needed some healing, right? Just from how things have gone on the field, et cetera, the past couple of seasons. That's been a huge point of emphasis. And I think so projecting that positivity, which we've seen it from Shane Beamer. We've seen it from pretty much every coach that's walked up there and taught, in my opinion. We saw that from Satterfield today. And yeah, so positivity about even the receiver position. I thought he was very complimentary of the quarterbacks, especially with how much he said that they have installed and how well that they've taken that in. With Luke Doty, he focused a lot on his arm talent, right? He has been very impressed with how natural he can throw the football. That's something that stood out. I think he said even more than he anticipated, and he anticipated really good things. But I thought his remarks about Colton Gauthier were very interesting because he said it's almost shocking how much they've thrown at Colton Gauthier, pre-snap reads, identifying the mic. I mean, all these different things that he's wanting the quarterbacks to do, and they've given them a lot on purpose. And so he had positive things to say about all those guys. But Gauthier was the second guy, Wes, that he mentioned. He said that he raved about his arm talent, his size, said he really stands out on the field. So I thought those are really interesting comments by Satterfield as well.
Yeah, and interesting when he was asked to sort of expound on playing quarterback and being a natural thrower. And he was talking about how some guys, you can coach a guy up. You can teach him how to throw a football. And obviously, I think with any player, there are going to be tweaks to the mechanics of how they do something. But his point when he says natural thrower, I don't think he was just throwing a buzzword out there about Luke Doty. His point was that some guys have been it's almost robotic, where they've been taught this is exactly how you're supposed to set your feet. This is exactly how you're supposed to turn your shoulders. This is exactly how you're supposed to release the football. Whereas with Doty, yes, he's worked hard to tweak his throwing motion, I'm sure, but the way the ball comes out is a natural spiral, and not every kid has that. So I thought that was an interesting point, considering what we already know about how athletic Luke Doty is, how much he can bring to the running game, how he can extend, I should say, plays and things like that. So that all of those things, again, were positive for the offense. And yes, he is being positive. He's pointing out the good things, maybe glossing over as far as the entire offense. I'm not talking about Doty specifically. He's going to gloss over the negative stuff at this point. But also, coaches don't just make things up for the most part. So when he's going out of his way to talk about him being a natural thrower, when he's going out of his way to talk about how quickly Colton Gauthier has picked things up, those things are actually happening. So they can be talked about as positives. And I thought it was kind of interesting. You wonder, hey, how's the staff going to go about their installation process? Some staffs sort of go the route of, we're going to spoon feed them a little bit at the time. Some of them say, we're going to just shove you in the deep end and let you sort of just learn as much as you can. That seems to be the case here. that they're throwing as much as they absolutely can at the guys, seeing how much of it they can pick up and process. And then at a later point, when you have to and you start getting closer and closer to the season, that's when I think you probably start to dial back, you start to tweak, you start to change things about what you're going to take into the season. And then even from there, what you're going to take into an actual game, which he said you have to be careful not to take too many plays into the game. Ideally, you only want to take about maybe 50 or so plays into the game.
Yeah, and he along those same lines, talking about Luke Doty and just sort of his progression, his development. He mentioned, look, we know what Luke Doty can do as an athlete. He's going to be able to extend plays, like you said, Wes. He can get out of trouble, design, run game. There'll be all those elements there. But right now, it's about curtailing that because they know Luke can do those things. They also know that he's a natural passer, but now it's about continuing to develop that arm talent, that natural arm talent that he has, to make him into the best possible passer that he can be going into this season and to be able to execute the offense. Then when it comes game time, when the live bullets are flying, when you need to run or when you're asked to run, you can go do those things. But it's about sort of forcing throws, and forcing throws not in the sense of into a tight window, but right now prioritize and practice making the throw for the reason that's why it's practice. You're trying to get better at certain aspects of it.
Yeah, John Mullins on Facebook wants to know, is South Carolina going to surprise some other football teams this season? John, I mean, I think it's way too early to have that conversation because, here's the thing, and I think this gets lost in translation a little bit whenever, everybody is in their off season right now. So when we talk about, hey, this guy's stepping up, or the coaches talk about this guy is stepping up, that is compared to their teammates. That's compared to what they're being asked to do in practice. That has no bearing whatsoever on what's going to happen when they face off with another SEC football player who currently right now is going through the same process of practicing, trying to earn a job, trying to put himself in his best spot to help his team. So is South Carolina going to be a surprise football team? Nobody really knows at this point. Now, it's way easier to surprise if people have no expectations for you. So the national or just the regional, like the SEC media, nobody's going to go into this season picking South Carolina very high. Right. So that gives you an opportunity to go out and sort of exceed expectations and win more games than people expect you to. But as far as the matchups, I mean, it's March 29th. How does EJ Jenkins match up with SEC linebacker B? Who knows? It's just to me that conversation is how sort of hype gets built in the offseason, and then people get disappointed if you don't live up to it when it was built, within the confines of the program itself, or within the fan base and media of the program itself. So yeah, you agree, Chris?
Yeah, and I think we could sit here right now and take a guess at where South Carolina may be projected. Like right now, if you're pegging it, if you're sort of thinking about the media and the way they think, the way they vote, South Carolina is probably going to get picked in the East this year, next to last behind Vandy, in front of Vandy. That'd be my guess. And a lot of times you're going to lean on what the team's done in the past year or two, what's returning, et cetera. And so there'll be several teams in the East that are picked ahead of South Carolina. And that's, if not fair, understandable based on what we've seen. So if that's your expectation, and then South Carolina does better than that, then yeah, maybe that counts as a surprise. Oregon State, who just wrapped up a Sweet 16 bid in men's basketball, was picked dead last in the Pac-12, and so they surprised some people. It also would have been a surprise if they were middle of the pack and didn't even make the tournament. That was mildly surprising. So I'm with you. I think it is a little bit too soon to know. There's still some things to learn about a lot of teams. I think we can sort of take a look at sort of the table in the East, if we're just narrowing it down to, within the division. And there are things that we know about certain teams as far as strengths, concerns. There are questions about all of them. There's some teams that we think will probably be better than others, but there's still such a long way to go. Just a few practices through spring ball for South Carolina, some other pieces to add, getting some guys back healthy. I mean, there's a lot of different things to consider there.
Yeah, and I think another guy before we move on to some Clayton White talk, Chris, very complimentary of Nick Muse, and I think made a great point. Satterfield did in that Muse was still coming off an injury. He's like, he's running around with this knee brace last year, and it seemed like sort of as the year progressed, like down the stretch, is when Muse really started to kind of take off again, and he and Luke Doty seemed to have a pretty good rapport. His statistically, his production went way up once Doty got out there. So I think that Satterfield's probably looking at him, looking at EJ Jenkins. These are guys that are going to be, it seems like, listed as tight ends. We assume Jenkins will be. Although I thought it was interesting, Beamer did not confirm that last week when he was asked about Jenkins, if he's truly a tight end or not. But those are guys that they may be tight ends as far as how you list them, but you can move them around, do a lot of different things with them. And when you look at the tight end background among the coaching staff here, and then Satterfield saying, there were 46 receptions by tight ends in 3 practices. Maybe for the first time in the history of football, there won't be a call-in show question this year about throwing to the tight end, because I think the ball is going to be thrown to the tight ends.
Yes. I think probably even if they threw 15 balls a game to the tight end, we would still, just based on tradition, get that call. So it'll move on to something else. It'll be the fullback. Now it'll be, why not line up, run the ball with a fullback. We'll probably see that this year. So it'll just move on. But no, I think, and Wes was making this point to someone earlier, talking about the tight end, because it is going to be, we do think, an important part of this offense. And Satterfield talked about every position, offensive line, quarterback, receiver. He talked about all of them. But a little bit, do you sense a little bit of using the media to put a recruiting message out there a little bit? I think we've seen some of that on social media and in some of these media opportunities of, guys, we're going to use the tight end here at South Carolina. Come on down. There's certainly at least one big target in Georgia that South Carolina is going after that I'm sure they wouldn't mind that message getting to as well.
Yeah, and that's what you have to do. And I said this, I think I said this on the show the other week. The guy in the upstate has been using his press conferences as a big old just recruiting speech since he got there. So yeah. I think you have to do that. Obviously, the Gamecocks really, really want Oscar Delp, number 1 tight end in the country. They'd love to bring him in and throw him a bunch of passes as a true freshman. And I think there's certainly some of that. And I think it's truthful too, but yeah. He did not have to give the number, but he did, which I think is why, you're probably onto something with that. I mean, 46 in 3 days, that is a pretty big number, I would imagine. So let's see. I think that's about it for now. Obviously, you can get a recap on Gamecock Central. Colin will have several stories out as well. Clayton White, as I said, I missed all of that, Chris. I did see I was reading the recap on Gamecock Central. He, I guess, talked a bit about the fact we already knew Jordan Birch is a physical freak. Had some praise for Tonka Hemingway. I do think it's interesting. Actually, I'm going to save that question. I'm going to throw this at you first. What was your biggest takeaway from Clayton White? What can you tell us, either like a little summary or just something that caught your attention?
Well, I thought, the linebacker talk was interesting, because this is something that we hit on earlier this spring after we got to see summer practice, Wes, just talking about some of the bodies that they have available there and a little bit healthier this year. Jamar Brown has still been working back from some injury. He missed all but I think 1 game last year, thinking off the top of my head. Sherrod Green obviously missed most of the season last year. So you've got Green back. You've got Brown working his way back. You got some newcomers. Debo Williams. Brad Johnson is not a newcomer, but he is working inside at one of those linebacker positions, which is certainly an interesting move. Rosendo Lewis has been injured most of his career. He's been practicing. He's been working. Mo Kaba, who played some as a true freshman and has talent. So I thought, that stood out to me, Wes, just in terms of, the number of guys at linebacker. And conversely, the other side of that is you really get the sense in talking to Clayton White that because of youth, because of some injuries, I sense some concern about defensive back. And I think we said this in a past edition of the show. Offensively, the biggest question mark position's receiver. Defensively, the biggest question mark position is defensive back. And I think, Wes, there's still a good argument to be made that defensive back is the biggest concern on this team right now. I think there's a pretty good argument for that. And I think while Clayton White didn't say that specifically, but I think there were some things he said where you really got a sense of that in listening to the press conference. That's something they've got to get figured out as soon as they can.
Yeah, and I think you can very easily make that argument. Especially as you look at just the number of people that are at receiver, you sort of tend to think, well, with that many guys who have a chance, a few of them will step up. And that there has been a little bit of positive momentum, I feel like, at that position. Whereas a defensive back, you have a lot of newcomers, you're replacing a lot of guys, and you just don't have as many kids to pull from. The group is much smaller, so you have sort of some number issues there as well. So I agree 100%. That's going to be a position to watch. We've talked about it a bit, and I think it's interesting. We have not yet been told by Shane Beamer or Clayton White who the guy is at this nickel, rover, spur, whatever the additional defensive back in this defense, which I actually tend to believe that has to be a key position. You have to be good there in these 4-2-5 defenses. Shane Beamer downplayed it. He said, look, it's about getting the best 11 on the field. That could be a 4-3, even though we know Clayton White has used the 4-2-5 at his disposal. I think most of his stops, certainly his previous stop, that was his scheme of choice. And, when he came in, his first press conference, he said that's his scheme of choice. So that will be interesting to me. Can they find that guy who can both cover SEC slot receivers and help in the running game and blitz off the edge and do all those things?
Yeah, that is a very important position. I mean, as all of them are, but that's one, again, because of how crucial it is. The nickel is always in a very interesting spot because of the reason that you said. He's a guy that's in the slot. So not only do you have the potential of covering a very fast or shifty or both talented slot receiver that can make you look silly if you don't cover him well in man-to-man coverage, but also you're getting yourselves into some situations where, you're one-on-one with maybe an offensive lineman, or you're getting blocked. And so if your nickel gets blocked, you can get some big issues there. And that's one reason, actually, that the previous regime under Will Muschamp had discussed and ultimately did play more 3 linebacker with a Sam linebacker, because they felt like they were getting blocked too much at the nickel position. And so they made some changes there. And so right now, I think one of the challenges, Wes, for South Carolina, when you're talking about nickel, and Clayton White made this point, when you're talking about depth at the defensive back position, and you got 5 guys out there essentially at defensive back, it's hard to find 10 if you don't have really good numbers because of, waiting on some guys to come in still, injuries, inexperience, whatever it may be. You add all those things up, it's hard to have 10, and that makes it difficult sometimes to practice effectively when you don't have the numbers that you need there.
Yeah, no doubt, man. Wade said Sherrod Green is fast for a linebacker. I tend to think, dude, Sherrod Green and him playing well is a huge key for this defense this year, because I think, there are question marks at linebacker. There are question marks in the secondary. We can list out all the question marks, but Sherrod is someone as a veteran, as a senior. Hopefully physically he is fine. I know he dealt with some stuff last year as far as injuries go, that were tough, really tough injury to come back from 100%, I think. But if he is good to go, if he's 100%, he's back to his old self. we have seen flashes from him at points in his career. And the season before this past year, when they put him at that Sam linebacker spot, he played very, very well, I thought. So whether he's there again, whether he's more at the will, whatever his role is, to me, he's a key guy in that you say, as a veteran, as someone who's played, as someone with physical ability, he's got to play well in order for this defense, to be pretty good. All right, y'all. I think we're going to about wrap it up here. Chris, was there anything else from White? Chris right now looks like he's a teacher whose class has just ticked him off, and he's just doing the crossing his arms there and going like, somebody try me. One more of you try me, and just wait and see what happens.
I'm not mad at all.
Do you
Everything's all good here.
Do you have any other additional comments?
I do not. We did get some questions, Wes, and I think I could be misremembering, as they say. I think did we tease the basketball situation at the beginning of the show? I know we've gotten some questions.
Oh, we
about
maybe did.
We might have. And we're working on that a little bit more. Should we discuss that, or should we point the people to GamecockCentral.com, where we'll have plenty more on that?
I mean, we'll have plenty more. I think the big picture answer, because I think some people are asking about it, the big picture answer is that all signs point to Frank Martin being back at South Carolina and coaching the basketball team in the 2021-2022 season.
Yep.
So that's the big takeaway for people who are still wondering, is it still up in the air, or is it sort of exactly what everyone was saying on Friday? Yes, it's still what everyone said on Friday. We'll see what that looks like as far as structuring. Are there changes to the contract, all that stuff? We could have something on that later on, but I think to me, that's probably the biggest takeaway. I think the people that are really paying attention and dialed in and on the websites maybe already know that, but if you're just sort of a more casual person checking in, then that's the big picture takeaway there.
Yep, I think that's it, man. We'll have plenty more. I mean, obviously that was an interesting saga, Wes. I mean, we spent plenty of time over the weekend and into today talking about the Frank Martin situation, but that's all signs point towards that, and we'll have some more coverage of that. I think today and in the coming days about just how things have played out.
Yeah, no doubt. For Chris Clark, I'm Wes Mitchell. Appreciate you joining us, and we'll see you all very, very soon. Probably talk to you